Good afternoon, all. Thank you, and welcome back to another in our Wednesday seminar series. I hope everybody had a safe and enjoyable Thanksgiving, got a chance to catch up on their rest and can reconnect a little bit, if only through Zoom, with family. Hope you all are staying safe. Today, Chris Black comes back to join us from LendingTree. LendingTree is one of the Charlotte homegrown success stories. One of the local startups working in the Charlotte area, and they came in and talked to us about a month or so ago about some opportunities in LendingTree, and now they've come back. Chris has come back as the head of talent acquisition to give a session on some of the do's and don'ts within the job search process, resumes, interviews, and even a little bit of the salary negotiations. And we're really excited to have Chris here. Chris, thank you so much. With all that, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. As Josh mentioned, Chris Black, I'm with LendingTree. I am a talent acquisition manager. I started with LendingTree in 2011. I have now, call it 15 years of recruiting experience. I had 10 years of experience in financial services, both as a trader and listed equities trader, and also financial advisor. The talk today is going to be really two parts. One, I'm going to be talking about how to build an effective resume. Second part is going to be on how to get and handle interviews. And what I'll do is I'll cut it halfway through after I wrap up on the resume section, see if there's any questions. I'll obviously do the same thing at the end. But also at the end, if anybody wants me to look at your resume and offer suggestions, I'm absolutely happy to do that. And I would strongly encourage you to share. I think we'll be able to do that, Josh, where you can share your screen, call up your resume, and we can talk about it. Again, happy to do that. Let's get started. So let's talk about why if a resume is so important. So let's see if I can get this working. There we go. This little disclaimer. So a resume really is your first impression. And I'm going to show you in a slide or two kind of why a first impression matters. But it's so important throughout the interview process. And it does set the tone for your entire candidacy. And at the end of the day, if you have an effective resume, if you're very good at interviewing, you're likely, as a college graduate, going to have multiple offers upon graduation. That's going to put you in the driver's seat. That's going to put you in control. And quite honestly, that's how you're going to get much higher compensation. It also puts you in a position to work for the companies you want to work for, doing the type of work that you really want to do. This, I think, is an important way to view the entire interview process, starting with the resume. So you're ultimately going to be on this gauge as far as the company is concerned. You're going to pop up, depending on how they view your resume, you're initially going to be somewhere on this gauge. That's going to change. It's going to change depending on how you handle yourself during the interview process. It's going to change depending on the caliber of other candidates that have applied after you. It's going to change depending on the mood of the interviewer. Could be any of a number of things, but you want to control it as much as possible. And the things we're going to talk about will help you do that. Let's look at some numbers here. 6 seconds. So this, according to the ladders, is the average amount of time a resume is reviewed before someone makes a decision whether to continue or not. So not much at all. 250 average number of applicants per job. I can tell you for entry-level roles, I can tell you for certainly internships, it's a multiple of that. At LendingTree, we get thousands of resumes for certain internships that we have. 75% of resumes are never read by a human. We're going to talk about this here in a little bit. It has to do with an applicant screening software that's used, but also a lot of it depends on just the sheer numbers. I don't look at all thousands of resumes for candidates that apply for internships. I find the good ones, by going after, and that it might be looking through the first 30. Usually it's looking through at least several hundred before I get there. But at the end of the day, there's only 24 hours, and I have to use them wisely. Let's talk about basic rules of writing a resume. Number one, you want your resume when you submit it to be in Word or Google Docs. This is something that some people will disagree with me about. I think it's a mistake. Some people will recommend that you put it in PDF format. Here's the problem with that. One, if a recruiter sees an error on your resume, they can't easily fix it. And that's obviously a problem. And also, if you're using an outside recruiting company, they want to redact your name, and because they don't want the company that they're working with to contact you directly, they want to get paid. So they will go through the trouble of changing your name to a number or putting in initials. If they have to go back and forth with you to make changes on your resume, that might just be enough for them not to want to reach out to you. Strongly recommend putting in a Word or Google Docs. Make sure your resume looks good at first glance. This is really much more important than people think. I'm going to show you two examples here in a minute. One is visually pleasing. The other really is not. Don't have a resume that's confusing. So you want to have similar font and sizes throughout. You want things to be very clean, very easy to read. And always, regarding any type of writing you're doing, keep the reader in mind. So in this case, keep in mind the recruiter that's reading your resume or the hiring manager that's reading your resume. They're really not concerned with you advancing, to be totally honest. They're not really concerned with you learning a lot, to be totally honest. Like they have their business objective. Now, a byproduct of a good manager is that those things will be a part of your career path. But for those, and I see it with college students all the time, that's what they're focused on, and they're missing the entire point of what the hiring manager is really focused on. And lastly, use phrases. You don't have to use sentences in a resume, and you shouldn't. For that reason, you should never use I. And you should also, and I would say this is true of any good writing, use fewer words when possible. If you can say something in 8 words instead of 9, say it in 8. And again, that goes beyond just writing a resume. Keywords, this has really become critical over the past 6 years. It's been around for about 15, but certainly the past 6 years, this is a big deal. More and more companies are using their applicant tracking software. That's what they use to keep track of resumes. And they have keywords they plug in. And resumes that don't have those keywords do not get read by a human. So it's critical to make sure your resume has those keywords. Well, how do you know what keywords that company is likely to use? Well, the answer is likely they're getting their keywords from the job description that they put out there. And so it's very, very important to keep in mind as you go through these different job descriptions. Write down common words, common phrases that you see from one job description for the next, because it's going to be pretty much the same from one company to the next. So we're talking about things like responsibility, certain software, certain industries all need to be the same. There is, and I would jot this down, there is a free software called jobscan.co where you can put in your resume, you can put in a job description and see how well your resume matches up to that job description. I'll also say this, if you, for job descriptions that are very specific, you should have the word that they're looking for in multiple places on the resume. So I recently filled a position for software engineer. We needed somebody with Python experience for a part-time internship. And I tell you, the ones that had Python 3-4 times in their resume, I gave them more credibility than someone that only had it on there once. Another thing to keep in mind is that very often it's just a recruiter that's putting in the keywords, and they may have something like databases. Well, if you have database on your resume, you're never going to get through. And I would view this as a human error, but it happens all the time. So make sure when possible that you use different versions, different tenses of these keywords to make sure that it's at least getting through that screening system. This is an example of a resume that does not look good. It's just a bunch of words, don't know where to start. There's not much white space. It's just not visually pleasing at all. And I'll say this, my guess is this person, if they did it themselves, probably isn't very good at communicating in the business world, at least written communication. This is probably an indication of how they communicate, which is the last thing we want. So one, just off the bat, I don't know where to start. It doesn't look good, but I can justify it by saying this person probably wouldn't be a good fit for a top company for the reasons I mentioned. So right off the bat, there's just too many words. It's too hard to read. You don't know where to start. This one looks good. This one has more space. It's easier to read. There's certainly flaws, their bullet points are very long and some other things that I don't like. But in general, this is what I like to see because it's clean and it's easy to read. With the other one, I'm a little frustrated. And of course, people, when they're frustrated, they never get mad at themselves. They always blame something else. In this case, they're blaming Taylor Stevens, which is a made-up name, that because I changed all the information, just so you know, for all these resumes. And so I'm getting mad at this person, I'm immediately deleting the resume. This one, I'm at least going to take those 6 seconds to look at. Let's look at the top section. So I'm going to talk about the top section of a resume. I'm going to talk about the middle section of a resume. I'm going to talk about the bottom section of a resume. So let's focus on the top section first. So you should, at a minimum, have your name, city. I wouldn't necessarily have your address on there. You may. There's nothing wrong with it. But at least have your city, have your phone number, and have your email address. It's more and more common to have your LinkedIn profile. I think that's a good idea. I don't certainly knock anyone for not having that. And also, depending on your major, your GitHub account. So at the very top, I would have the city and state you live in. I would have your phone number, email address, LinkedIn profile, GitHub account. And I would not have, and I'll show you this here when we get to another part, I wouldn't have an icon for LinkedIn because it might, as your resume gets passed along, that link may break. And so I would actually write out your, for example, your LinkedIn or your GitHub, your links there. And then in new grad, I would put education at the top. This is a nice clean look. Again, less is more. So this person has a major GPA, just personal opinion, I would just put GPA. It's understood that it's in the major. If so, it's only, actually in this case, no, it would make sense to have specific in the major listed there. I'm guessing they have pretty bad overall GPA, or else they would have listed that. The dean's list honoree, I think it's okay to list that. Very often it's repetitive. So if this person's overall GPA, or if they would have just listed GPA without the major there, let's assume that, there's no reason to list the years that they were dean list honoree. And let's face it, it was likely certain semesters within those years, but who cares? Like, it's just, obviously you hit the dean's list if you have a GPA of 3.65, it's repetitive, so I wouldn't put it there. The skills section, this is becoming the norm. Instead of writing sentences and having it block style, this is much easier to scan, much easier to read. One thing I would say at the very top where it says Microsoft Office with a focus on Excel, everybody thinks they're good at Excel. Like, everybody's an 8. When I ask anybody, scale 1 to 10, where are you? There's an 8. Have you ever used VLOOKUPs, macros, any of them? Nope, never heard of them. Like, these, so if you've used specific functions within Excel and you know how to use them well, you should list those instead of just saying that you're good at Excel, because that's going to be a lot more meaningful for the reader. All this other stuff is good. You want to have some things on there. I would try to stay away from fluff like team player and things like that. Fast learner, like everybody's those things. It's not effective. Let's see. Let's go on to the experience section. So the middle section of your resume. This is important, and this is the layout that most companies are looking for. If you're a graphic designer or something like that, maybe you get a little bit more creative. But keep in mind that 6-second number that I mentioned. If I'm hunting and pecking, trying to figure out where you worked, when you started, when you left, that's time wasted, and I'm likely just to move on. So this is the style of format that just about everybody uses for their experience, and because everyone uses it, we know where to look for the information we need. So title at the top, usually a company name right below that, often the location just to the right of that. I recommend putting in a brief description of the company and the role. The bullet points should really be listed for your accomplishments. Now, depending on what you've done, where you've worked, what kind of internship you have, it might not be accomplishment driven. It may be task driven, in which case you'd have to, for your bullet points, list the task. But if you were able to accomplish some things, absolutely that needs to go in the bullet points. And then for things that are what's written out below the company name should be just a very brief description of the company, especially if it's not a well-known name, and then what the role did. Again, it's very high level, nothing too specific. And one thing that's very important is the beginning of each bullet point has to have a very impactful word. So I'm going to show you a heat map here in a second. And the reason what this shows is where eyes are drawn to on a page. And clearly they're drawn to the very beginning of bullet points. So the first word of each bullet point has to be impactful. So it has to be a word like created, managed. These are the things that are going to keep the reader reading. And that's ultimately what you want. You want that reader to stay on your resume for as long as possible, and also highlight what you've done, what you've been able to accomplish. So again, that first word is really important. Here's an example of the experienced of some of the experience section of a resume. And again, this is just the norm of what we like to see. For the one thing to keep in mind as well, and the heat map showed this a little bit, the bullet points that are most important are going to be the first bullet point, the second bullet point, and the last bullet point. So make sure that they start off with impactful words. Another thing that's so important is to use actual numbers in your bullet points and really in your resume in general. This does several things. One, it shows believability because you're using specific numbers, which people tend to believe. And so it shows also level of professionalism. You're somebody that has tracked these things. And it could be you were a cashier at Wegmans. I'm from upstate New York. We have Wegmans there, and I was a cashier in high school and college. If I tracked, during that time, on average, how many people came through my line, that immediately puts me in a different light than someone that didn't track those things. So that's another reason why it's important to have numbers. And lastly, it's been proven that people are drawn to numbers on a page, especially men, but women are as well, but men off the charts. They see a number on a page, they're looking at it. So it's important to include numbers when you're discussing your accomplishments. Here's another example. This is actually my cousin's daughter. She's graduated from OU. What I like about this is that so many times people have part-time jobs on their resume, but they'll list it as if it's a full-time job. And here you can see underneath graduate teaching assistant on the left-hand side, right below it, 20 hours per week. The position below that, lead software engineer for Boeing, 20 hours a week, but it was 40 hours in the summer. And then you can see that the months that she worked in years right below that. That's just an additional level of transparency on their part, which leads the reader to trust them more. So that's one of the things that I'm just a big fan of. But this is good. I wish the dates were off to the right-hand side, because again, that's what people are used to reading. But this is the type of thing that as a reader, we like to see. One thing I would stay away from as well, and these, to be honest, were some pretty high-level internships and work experience that she gained, but a lot of internships are not, and a lot of college jobs are not. And they'll have 7, 8 bullet points. Quite honestly, it doesn't warrant 7 or 8 bullet points. Like, it just keep things down to what you accomplished. People understand what a lot of the roles out there did. This is an example of the bottom section, the final section of your resume. I highly recommend having a bottom section. A lot of people just kind of end it with some last piece of experience, or the experience that's at the bottom. And I would put something like this, and it could be additional training, additional information. Most companies will not dock you for listing things like hobbies or work experience. I like to see Coursera, Lynda classes, like things like that. But I personally like to see hobbies. Like, I like to see that someone's well-rounded. And just as a company, I can tell you, LendingTree love to see individuals who have taken Coursera, Lynda, Udemy classes. It just shows a level of passion. Another thing that would go here: meetup groups that you attend, meetup groups attended, list them out. It's a big thing. It's another thing. LendingTree absolutely loves to see things like that. And I would say companies like LendingTree as well absolutely love to see those types of additional work, things people are doing outside of school. This is an actual bottom section that I copied from a resume. This is good. They broke down their proficiency fluid with the different languages. And I would list the languages, software languages, starting with what you know best. And I would also be very, very careful not to put any software languages that you don't know very well. Because if it's on your resume, it's fair game. And when we quiz people, we'll quiz people on that. And if they really don't know what they're talking about, even though it's on their resume, that's a huge red flag for us. Like they're not being honest. That's the same person that's going to say, yeah, the project will be done tomorrow, and it's not. And so these are the types of things that are red flags for us. And so definitely always just be totally honest. I like that they have some interest here. This is a typical way to wrap up the bottom section of a resume. Here's another one. This is good, a little bit more robust, but I think it's a good way to wrap up the resume. At the bottom, again, I mentioned this earlier. I'm not a fan of this, even though surely you mouse over, it's linkable, because again, those links may break as this resume gets emailed from one person to the next. So some additional suggestions here as we wrap up the resume section. One, you don't want to be modest. Some people are afraid of coming across as arrogant on a resume, and you really shouldn't. This is not a time to be modest. If you accomplished something, you did something, take credit for it. But obviously, you never ever want to exaggerate, and also you want to be careful how that carries over into your interview. So during the interview, where people can get a better read for you, you want to be careful not to come across as too boastful. You still want to take accomplishments for what you've done, take credit for the accomplishments you've done rather, but you do need to be just a little bit careful on that end. Always have 2 or 3 people closely review your resume, and you really want to do this sequentially. So you want to have one person review your resume, get it back, send it to another person, but 2 or 3 people at a minimum, because it is a big red flag when you see mistakes on a resume. And if somebody's been working on their personal resume for hours and hours, and they do it over the course maybe of months, you'd be amazed at what I've seen people miss. Bright people that miss just big mistakes because they just have been looking at the same resume over and over. And then also finally, it's important that your resume match up with your LinkedIn profile. So the titles, the dates, all those things need to line up, because if they don't, something's not right. At a minimum, when I see it, I know the person either isn't detail oriented or they're being misleading. They're trying to mislead us with something. But in any event, that's also a big red flag. So let's look at some numbers as it relates. Actually, let's take a step back and see if you have any questions regarding resumes before we dive into interviews.
We've got a couple in the chat. I don't know if you can see those or not. But Shri was asking, how important is the summary section in a resume?
So we're talking about, the very top. I recommend having something at the top before you list your education. And if you're a new grad, I would list your education at the very top. And so, yes, you should put some sort of summary there. Sometimes you don't even have to list it, label it. Some people might have an objective, but it helps to break things up a little bit. I do think there's something to be said for individuals that are either graduating college or switching careers to specifically mention what it is they're looking for. Because honestly, too many college students come out and they have no idea what they want to do. And honestly, not to be a jerk about it, it's not my job to figure out what you want to do with your life. Like, I want to see people that have some idea of what they're interested in. They're passionate about something, even if it's a develop passion. So I'm a big believer of saying, this is what I'm looking for. We're going to talk about that during the interview when you look for getting an interview, but I recommend having something along those lines. So, if I'm a college student about to graduate, I'm listing specifically actively seeking a role as X, and I'm having a summary section that highlights some of the reasons they should hire me.
And then the next question was from Jill, can relevant projects sub for work experience? So for students coming straight out of school and may not have had as much professional experience, how do you balance that?
It can. Obviously, it doesn't get as much weight. And I would specifically label whether it was a project for school or project outside of school. And but absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with listing projects. They don't, depending on how you write them and put it in there, you can have 3 or 4 projects listed, main projects for school, and a title and a brief description. You could do that with 1 or 2 lines each. And so I think that would be a good way to do it. If you just don't have the experience, plug it in there in your resume. You do want to have something, like you don't want a resume that's only half a page long. So projects can be a good way to put that in. What you don't want to do is resort to, say, a part-time job that you had in high school. Like, you want to stay away from that. So projects could be both, show you what you've done, but also be a good filler.
You mean bagging at Wegmans isn't going to do it?
It's not going to do it.
Okay. All right.
Chris, I also had a question for you. So when you're talking about the bottom section about skills that you might have, for somebody like me who's pretty new to like a graduate program with some of the skills, how you're saying if you're not 100% of those skills, don't list them. If we're learning these skills and we do have some level of them, should we still list them and like maybe mention more detail about that?
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with qualifying it. That you have experience with, might not be the same as expert in. So there's nothing wrong with qualifying it, but yes, the only thing I would say that if you spent one Saturday morning looking at SQL, don't put it on your resume. Like,
Right.
you should, if it's on your resume, you should be able to solve basic problems with it.
Right. The predicament that I was saying more specifically is somebody like me, I have plenty of work experience, but I don't have much work experience towards like the master's program. So for somebody like me who's looking for an internship, I'd like to say some of the skills that I do have, even though I don't have specific job experience with them.
Right.
So that would be the predicament that I have.
Right, and you could put it both. You could put it at the bottom of the resume, like technical skills here. There's nothing wrong with that. Putting it at the top, because you're gaining those skills as you go.
Gotcha.
So there's nothing wrong with that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, let's move on to the interview side of things. And these numbers are really important. And so, and they vary depending on the study being done, but roughly 60%, I've seen numbers as high as 80% of positions being filled by a company are through some sort of connection. 30% are filled through online applications, and roughly 10% are filled by recruiting companies. The problem with this is that these numbers are widely known, but yet just about everyone spends their time only on online applications. They go to Indeed. That's how they spend their time looking for a job. It's a huge mistake. It really is. What you're looking at here should be a roadmap as to how you spend your time. And I would say if you're graduating in May of 2021, you needed to start this process a couple months ago. Like this is something that you really should be working hard at. Just spoke with somebody from MIT Sloan. She's graduating in May 2021, and she has 4 offers on the table already. Like, that's quite honestly the position that you want to be in. And you're in a position where we're going to talk about how, but really you're in a position where you can make that happen, especially if you've done things along the way, like started side projects outside of school, you have a well-developed GitHub account, you have maybe a mobile app, all the things that companies really like to see, and you've done those things. There's no reason you shouldn't have multiple offers. Let's talk about applying online. This is obviously the easiest. It's, as I just mentioned, what people think of when they think of looking for a job. But really the mistake people make is they just hit that click button and they send the resume off. Big mistake. The first thing you should do when you're looking at, let's assume you're looking at Indeed and you find a job that you're interested in, is you should hop on LinkedIn and see if you have any connection to the company at all. And this might be an actual person that you went to school with and now they're working there, but it could be someone you've never met. It could be someone that went to UNCC. It could be a connection who is connected to your mom, but there's some kind of connection there. You should always try to find that kind of connection. I would go as far as to say that you should look for someone in that department in a somewhat senior position. So if you're looking, argument's sake, you're looking for a position in software engineering, maybe you don't want to shoot for the CTO, but maybe you should find a VP of software engineering that you can send a message to. And you can send a message through LinkedIn very easily. You might have to pay $2 or $3 to do that, but you should do that. I'm always amazed that people are like, $2 or $3 to send a message, and they're like, I can't do that, but let me get my Starbucks coffee. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. So absolutely invest in your career, even if it's $2 or $3 at a time. And then I would have some kind of cover letter. More often or not, what I'm referring to is just kind of something that you're putting either in a LinkedIn message or you're putting in the body of an email, and basically something short and sweet. I'm interested in such and such a position, or maybe you're starting off with, Avid Exchange is a company that I'd really like to work for. I'm interested in such and such a position. Should I send you my resume, or should I apply to the position directly through the company website? Most people are going to respond to that. Like, just most people are good people. They're going to try to help. They know you're somebody that's going to be graduating college. People look for ways to help people in a situation like that, because more often than not, somebody helped them. What this takes, though, for so many people is getting outside of your comfort zone a little bit. And so many people aren't willing to do that. So many people nowadays are not willing to send a 2-sentence email to a stranger. And that's what this takes. This makes all the difference in the world, because a lot of times what happens is you send a bunch of these out, and that person then sends it to, say, the head of the department or the recruiter that's handling this position. Next thing you know, this is an internal referral as far as they're concerned, as far as the recruiter is concerned, even though they've never met you. And that makes all the difference in the world. And so taking these steps really matter. And you might not hear back from somebody. You might send 100 of these out, and you may only hear back from 8 people, but you're going to hear back from 8 people. And that's massive. You can make a lot of headway by having someone helping you at a company. Can't stress that enough. Recruiters, 10% of positions roughly filled by recruiters. These are outside agencies. They're either going to be contingency or retained. Retained, you just need to know that these are higher level positions, typically on the low end, $175,000 a year salary. Just as you progress through your career, know that somebody reaches out to you regarding a retained position, you need to pay attention. The retained recruiters, they get paid upfront. They get paid a retainer, and they get paid, I would say, whether they use them or not, but they always essentially do. Very often, an outside retained search firm, they'll get paid even for screening internal candidates, and so they're trusted. More often, these are individuals who have worked in the industry for many years, and they are well compensated. Like, they're making real stinking money, often in the 7 figures. Contingency is, I'll tell you, my brother's a hedge fund trader. The retained search firm that placed him 3 years ago made $130,000 off of him just for placing him, one placement. The contingency is different. They get paid contingent upon the person being hired by the company. It varies. Typical fees are 15 on the low end. Usually it's 20 to 25% of that person's salary they're getting paid. So still very incentivized to make sure that things go smoothly and you get placed with a company. But just know, and recruiters can be your best friend, and keep in mind that their major concern is the client. That's who's paying them the money, the company. And so some people treat recruiters like they're just passing the resume along, and that's a huge mistake. Like, you make sure that you're keeping that person happy, you get back to them quickly. Recruiters can be very, very, very important in the process. And that's external recruiters and internal recruiters as well. For years, I was head of technology hiring at LendingTree. I think it's probably 95% of the compensation was decided by me. And of course, the recruiters never knew that. And it's only human nature. Like, you want, people that you trust and like, they deserve the best compensation possible. Make sure you keep the recruiters happy. Connecting with people is so important. So like so important. People often just kind of go in this bubble of just applying for positions online, and part of getting a job is letting as many people know as possible that you're looking for a job, one, and specifically what you're looking for. I'll go back to the point I made a while back about, it's not the person's job to figure out what you're interested in. It's something that you need to let people know. And this is something that that I'm, it might be a friend of your parents. It could be a cousin that you haven't talked to in 10 years. It could be anything, but it's a short email. It's letting them know your current situation. I'm about to graduate in May with a degree in such and such from such and such. I'm looking for a job in such and such. I'd really appreciate it if you would pass my resume along to anyone that might be able to help me. That's it. And you never know what that might lead to. And it has nothing to do with where that person works. It has nothing to do with what that person does for a living. It's just that you happen to know them. Here's a real life example. So this is a candidate that LendingTree hired, that LendingTree hired. They were looking for a job actively. They had 4 months before had dinner. This guy's sister was in a sorority, happened to be in Charlotte. And so this guy went over, had dinner with this couple he had never met, his sister and this couple he never met. So 4 months go by, and he, it was just a dinner. They never talked again. But he had this guy's email address, and he sent his resume to this guy, and just basically said probably something similar to what I just mentioned. This guy happened to know a recruiter and just said, "Hey, I don't know if you can help this guy or not, but here's his resume." And that recruiter had a connection at LendingTree, and that guy got a job at LendingTree. Like in this, and sometimes the degrees are massive. It might be 5 degrees before someone gets a job. I'm always amazed how the dots get connected, but they do get connected. And again, this comes down to a numbers game. The more people you connect with and you let them know what you're specifically interested in, what your elevator pitch is, the more likely you are to get connected with the companies that you want to get connected with. Let's talk about an actual process of getting interviews. So the first thing you want to do is target 20 to 30 companies. And I would say probably at a minimum, I wouldn't go nuts. I wouldn't go 60 or 70 because you want to be able to keep track of the work that you're doing. And you want to be specific in your communication. So you want to find these companies, you want to find people at these companies that might be able to help you, and you want to reach out to them. And also, and I'm going to show you an Excel spreadsheet in a second, but you want to have a plan and you want to set goals. And that's really the only way things get done on a high level. And you want to have, maybe it's a number of connections per week, number of people that you reach out to. Again, this becomes a numbers game. And it does take a fair amount of work. It takes time on LinkedIn. It takes time to track all the work that you're doing, but absolutely there will be a payoff. And so I recommend setting up an Excel spreadsheet just like this, where companies would be listed on the left-hand side, the weeks throughout the different months we listed across the top, and then listing what you've done with each person that you've connected to along the way. And this is a way to easily see if you really want to work for Apple and you haven't connected with anybody in 3-4 weeks, it's going to be glaring in a dashboard like this, and hopefully would prompt you to take some action. So highly recommend whatever you might use to keep track of your efforts in your job search. Let's talk about preparing for an interview. So let's assume this process works, because it does, and you get an interview. And this is true of a phone interview, face-to-face interview, or a Zoom interview. We're going to talk about a Zoom interview here in a second. But the first thing you want to do, if you take nothing away from this talk, take away this. You need to practice your answers to common interview questions. This really is a game changer. So let's assume that you're asked a common interview. There's a lot of behavioral questions nowadays during interviews. One of them is, have you ever faced an ethical challenge? What was it? How did you handle it? It's common. It's been around 10, 15 years. And if I asked any of you that question during an interview, assuming you wanted to work for my company, you'd come up with something. You'd come up with an answer because getting a job depended on it. But think for a second, if, let's assume this job is in April of next year. What if today you started thinking about what your answer would be to that question? And it may develop a little bit as you kept thinking about it. But once you came up with a good format of what that answer might look like, what if you started practicing how specifically you would answer that? What the inflection would sound like. And there's studies that have been done that show that that how you answer a question can be as important as the content of the answer. So how confident you come across, how articulate you are in that answer is going to be critical. And the best way to do that is to practice your interview questions over and over again. Now, how do you find them? Of course, you can Google them and get a good list of interview questions. And the fact of the matter is, if you do this over and over again and keep track and write down your answers and review your answers before the interview, you're going to absolutely crush it. Like, you're just going to come across as a confident professional who's able to answer all these questions at a high level. And you really want to do this for, 30, 40, 50 questions. And the fact is that they might not ask that question specifically, but if you've gone through this process with dozens and dozens of questions, you're going to have a really good answer for anything they're going to throw at you. Next thing you want to do is do a ton of research. This really does help people to feel a lot more confident when they're sitting down for this interview. If they know that person and they've looked at everything they can about that person, you as a candidate are going to feel a lot more comfortable. So research the company, obviously everyone you're interviewing with, the position, and also one thing you want to do is keep track of your accomplishments, like just throughout your career, but even now have an accomplishment sheet. It might even be online, and you want to refer to this just before you go into any interview. And that way these things are top of mind, you can rattle it off. And these are things that are not on your resume, but things you've done that may not totally fit on your resume. Typically, face-to-face interview, you want to arrive 10 minutes early. You don't want to arrive 20 minutes early. But for online interview, you do want to log in 5 minutes before it starts. Let's talk about the actual interview. Absolutely, you should smile. So many times people get nervous, they don't smile at all the entire time. And it's just harder to connect with people when they're not smiling. So absolutely do that. Obviously in the beginning, obviously at the end, but even during the interview. You want to look the person in the eye, you look in the camera. You don't want to just stare the entire time, but people trust people that look them in the eye, and looking at people in the eye through the camera actually is an effective next best thing. You do want to sit upright. A lot of people will fidget when they get nervous. They don't even realize they're doing it. So I would pay attention to that. If you think you do that or you might do that, I'd be aware of that. And just put your hands on your lap and just kind of keep them there. Because if you start to fidget, it's going to make the other person more nervous. It's just not going to go as smoothly. And I would just be authentic. I would be yourself. Obviously, want to be professional. We absolutely just want to be your true self. You do want to have, this is what I highly recommend. Have a yellow notepad, just like this, typical yellow notepad. At the top of each page, write the name of the person you're going to be talking with. So, if it's 5 different people, I have 5 different pages. And then I would, at the bottom or somewhere, I'd recommend putting at the bottom, questions that you're going to ask. And then in the middle, I would take notes. At the end of the day, if you're a high-level professional, you're interviewing the company as well. You're not going to go with a company just because they make you an offer. Like, you're going to have multiple offers, and you have to judge whether this company is a good fit for you. And the fact is, you might be talking with 4, 5, 6 people in one day. There's just a whole bunch of information being thrown at you. You need to take notes to keep track of all these things. It's just what a professional does. And so you absolutely want to take notes of the highlights, not consistently writing down everything the person happens to say. You absolutely want to, I think I put it on the next page about asking questions. I did. One thing you want to do is limit your responses really to 3 or 4 sentences. If it's a story-based response, it may be just a little bit more than that. It's easy for people to start rattling on and on and on, especially when they're nervous. And next thing you know, the interviewer was only able to ask 2 questions, and they didn't get the information that they needed. So keep your responses to 3 or 4 sentences. If the interviewer needs more clarification, they'll ask you. Absolutely ask questions. Keep in mind, though, the 2 most important parts of an interview or any meeting is the very beginning and the very end. So you want it to end on a positive note. You of course want to have the questions, legitimate questions that you have answered, but you want to be a little bit careful here. You don't want to talk about, what's the, can you tell me, do a SWOT analysis for the company, or even can you tell me what the greatest weakness is of the company for the next 2 years? No company is really going to tell you that. They're not going to be honest about it if there's a major weakness, because they don't want that to get out, right? But also, you don't want this to be uncomfortable. In a perfect world, it would be something they said during the interview that you're following up on. If nothing else, though, revert to one of the questions that you wrote down and ask them that, and have different questions for different people. Don't ask interviewers or hiring managers anything about benefits. And I would leave the benefits till the offer stage. It's just an old rule of thumb. You don't talk about benefits during the process. If it's a legitimate company, they're going to have, decent benefits. And if not, you can ask for money. If not, you can turn down the offer. But too many times people come in, oh, what are the vacation days? And it doesn't make you look good. Let's talk about timing. So you've gone through the interviews. What does follow-up look like? I recommend everyone that you've met with, I recommend sending them an email that day or the next day. And really, as far as who you send emails to, at that point, I wouldn't send the typical interviewer any more emails. I would only send emails to the recruiter you're dealing with at the company, sometimes the outside recruiter, and the hiring manager for the position. And even then, very often it's just the recruiter, but I recommend sending emails to both. And I recommend doing that 1 week after the interview, and I recommend doing it 3 weeks after the interview. Keep in mind, this entire time, the ball is in their court. It's not, it's up to them. I would not push the issue. Some people say push the issue so you get an answer. It's a huge mistake. Maybe they're not getting back in touch with you because, and by the way, they should, right? Like they should, but they don't always. But maybe they're not getting back in touch with you because they're trying to get approval for another position within the company. It could be any of a number of things. If you really push hard, you're going to burn those bridges. They're never going to hire you. So I wouldn't push it. I would send either that night or the next day, 1 week later, 3 weeks later, and then I would let it go. Know your value. So they're going to make you an offer. You have to know whether that's a good offer or not. And let's talk about the ways to do that. One, and this is the best way, is to talk to people in the field about compensation. This is another thing that people are just very scared to do. But for those that put in the effort, they get rewarded for it. And it's a simple conversation. You're talking with somebody that is in your field, and you've done some research prior to talking to them, and then you ask them. My understanding is that people coming out of college typically have a salary of $55,000. Do you think that's high, or do you think that's low? And you do this not with one person, but 5, 6, 7 people, and you're going to get a good idea of what a typical person makes in that role. And it could be years from now, your 10 years of experience, it's the same conversation. Hey, I'm looking at moving to Austin. My understanding is that someone with 10 years experience usually gets paid about $130 per year. Do you think that's high, or do you think that's low? This is you just over and over again in order to gauge where your compensation should be. Glassdoor, FLC Data Center, they're good, and they give some good data points, but it's not as good as talking with people in the actual field. Can't stress this enough. And many people are scared to do it. You'll be rewarded for it if you do. There's nothing wrong with negotiating unless the person has told you up front, we're giving you, this is our best and final offer. And there's times I've done that in my career where I've told somebody, hey, we're putting together our best offer there's really not going to be any negotiation here. This is what we have. So it's always okay to negotiate. You don't want to go too high. If someone offers you 60 and you come back in at 90, like there's immediate fear there that you're not going to be happy in that role, regardless, because let's face it, they offered you 60, there's no way they're going to go to 90. They might go to 70, but even then, you might not be happy with that because you asked for 90. So be careful what you go for, unless you're justified, unless that's what if the role's getting 90 and they offered you 60, say, I would let them know. My understanding is that this role pays 90. I'm really targeting 90. Can you come up to that number? And again, you're not going to have that kind of confidence to ask to do something like that unless you've done your research beforehand. And lastly, if it's not in writing, it doesn't matter. Like if they say we're going to give you a bump up in 6 months, have them put it in writing. And I'm not saying walk away from it, but I'm saying don't expect it. Like it's just, if it's not in writing, when it comes to money and it comes to an offer letter, if it's not in writing, it doesn't matter. So get them to, even if it's in an email, doesn't matter what it is. And this could be a title change. It could be any of a number of things. Get them to put it in writing. And if they're really hesitant to put it in writing, there's a reason why. Some additional suggestions. Absolutely don't wing it when it comes to finding a job. Have a plan when it comes to getting interviews and work that plan as much as possible. Absolutely leverage the people you know. And I'll say this final one, and people don't believe me, but really your attitude matters. Like if you have this idea that, oh, we're in the middle of a pandemic and really there's no point because, who's hiring? And you can always find something to complain about. Like, oh, we've had this, this bull market for the past 10 years. It's bound to turn at some point. What's the point of trying that hard? Your attitude matters. If you think you're going to get a great job, chances are you're going to get a great job. All right. Now what questions?
Thanks, Chris. Questions folks have?
Does anybody want me to look at the resume?
If you are courageous enough to jump out there, you're going to get rewarded for it. So if you've got a resume that you're willing to share, here's a chance to get some feedback.
Let me see if I can pull mine up. It's not too, let's tear it up.
It's a great Latin saying, "Audente sa fortuna juvata," fortune favors the bold. And it's so true.
I mentioned this when we first got on the phone call, but I feel like I should show mine and you help me because I've sent it to you before and never heard back. And so I was like, maybe I should ask him about it and say, the only way I can learn is for you to tear it apart and tell me how to fix it. And then.
Sure, pull it up. And quite honestly, I get so many requests. I just can't. I can't. It's not fair for LendingTree to answer all the requests. But yeah,
absolutely.
Feel free to call it up.
Yeah.
I've got mine as well. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Here we go.
Great. So you have the things that we talked about. Like it's a clean look. I would switch over a little bit the city so that the dates are just more obvious on the right hand side. Depending on immigration status, I'm a big believer of putting U.S. citizen or green card holder if that's your situation, because immigration has gotten so difficult, and I would say even in the past few weeks, I think there's been changes. But all of this looks good. One thing we didn't talk about that doesn't probably involve you, Kevin, but let's say you're moving to another city. There's nothing wrong with putting that other city on there. If you're specifically saying, I'm going to be moving to Oklahoma City, like there's nothing wrong with putting Oklahoma City on there. Now, it could be a situation where you're willing to relocate anywhere, in which case you should put willing to relocate anywhere. Like there's typically people list that maybe parenthetically after their address, but if that's your situation, you should, because the assumption is you're probably not willing to move. So if you are, absolutely mention this, absolutely put that. This looks good. I don't know that it's linkable, but sometimes it makes things easier. People can just click on your email address to send you a message. Again, at this point in 2020, I put your LinkedIn profile on there, put your GitHub address on there if you have that. And I would say if you're in the technical field, even a little bit, you should have a GitHub account. Like that's one of the things that, we just kind of, companies like LendingTree would almost not look at a resume unless it has a GitHub account or a tech position. It doesn't quite line up like your merchandiser and counselor. I would have it line up with the dates. So I would put Charlotte, North Carolina under Scott's. I would put March 2020 where it is, but I would raise it up just a couple spots and have it line up with merchandise.
Just make it all a little bit more concise and
and flat, so it goes straight across. Or merchandise where there's no space. You have merchandise or Scott's, Charlotte, and then there's no space between that and stock. And that merchandiser and counselor lines up with the dates on the right hand side.
Okay.
But this is good. Like things we talked about, I would add numbers, like even like generic numbers related to what you did. In years to come, it'll be what you accomplished. Here, you probably have to stick with what you did. Nothing wrong with that. And this here again, it looks like it was a full-time position. I'm guessing it's not. I would put hours per week on that. You want to scroll down a little bit so we can keep looking. And so I'm a big believer that education should go at the top. And even now, more and more people are saying that even for people with many years of experience, education should go to the top, because a lot of times that's what companies look for. I'm not a huge fan of that, but it's a fact. So I would put it at the top. Honestly, your education's a little kludgy, a little hard to follow. I'm not, it doesn't need bullet points. I would get rid of the bullet points when where it has bachelor's and bachelor's. And so it's just a little bit hard to follow me because the dates don't line up like they should. But I would look at that, and then also your spacing is off. NC by Charlotte went to the next line. These are things that that do matter. I wouldn't have on your resume places where you're bolding 2 lines in a row. So I might unbold the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. But this, it looks good. Software proficiency. I might clean that up just a little bit. It doesn't look bad. It really doesn't. You want to scroll down a little bit more?
And that's basically it right there.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, it looks good.
Okay, and then the last 2 questions I had for you. Is that still a thing to basically make sure you stay within a 1-page?
Not as much, because that came from an era where people printed off resumes or mailed them. And so it's not as big of an issue. But I'll say this, if you're coming out of college, it probably doesn't warrant a 2-page resume. And also there still is on any kind of Word document a page break. And so if you have, say 6 lines going on the next page, it doesn't look that great. And so I would find a way to cut some spaces to get it to fit on 1 page. But also, if you had a number of internships and you've done a number of things and you have a page and a half, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just because people are just emailing it around and reading it on their laptops.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Chris, do you have time for one more? Can we sneak Jill's up there? And
Sure. Or anybody else?
Well, I got to get to the front of the line if they want that to happen.
So it's good that you can kind of clearly see what you've done. You have your GitHub account on there. I I would stay away from this type of format.
Okay.
And it goes back to the point I made that with the format that I described, that's what people are used to seeing. So
Okay.
immediately their brain is pre-programmed to, okay, where's the experience and where's the data off to the right-hand side? And I have to hunt to find that a little bit. Now we're talking about things that take literally half a second. But on a percentage basis, that's a lot when you're talking about 6 seconds.
Absolutely.
So I would go to that typical, more typical resume format that I outlined. I don't think some people put a line across the top. I think it's okay. I don't think it looks bad. Say you have your name and then below your name, but above the line, you have city, state, your phone number, email address, GitHub account. And again, maybe it's linkable. I don't know, but if it should be at least linkable, even if it's broken later on, I would make that linkable. So I'm guessing it's not.
Yeah, it's not right now.
Okay. So yeah, those are things that I would do for the email address, LinkedIn, and GitHub. And I would also put some time, we didn't really talk about it, but besides having your resume match up perfectly with your LinkedIn profile, I would spend some time making sure that looks good. That you have a picture on there, that you belong to some professional groups on LinkedIn. And really what I would do is spend a lot of time looking at individuals on LinkedIn who are maybe have 5 years of experience and they're ahead of you a little bit and get ideas. I would never plagiarize, never want to copy and paste, but somebody may list some things on their resume that you think you could list too. They're like, oh good, I didn't even think about including that. I'm going to include that. And so I would always, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just look at a bunch of other LinkedIn profile for idea. And I'll say this, I would look at individuals coming out of top schools because they are stinking good at having their students look good. So their students look good, like their resumes look good, their LinkedIn profiles look good. They put a lot of effort into that. So I would look at top schools, and it's so easy to search on LinkedIn for things like that. But as far as the other things on your resume, I think it's good as we talked about, to have your education at the top, and you're about to graduate. So it really doesn't matter. But for those that are not about to graduate, I'm just a big believer in putting expected, like expected May 2021. It's just kind of, tomorrow's not promised. You just don't know how things may work. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to assume you're definitely going to graduate on that day. But this looks good. Can you scroll down just a little bit?
Sure.
So yeah, good. I would move the experience up because, whatever it might be, individuals are more interested in that. I think the project approach is good. I think it takes up a lot of space. Let's say this, if it was a project, meaning that it was a side business, that's different. That could even be included as experience, and it should. But for school projects, and I'll tell you one thing that we look for at LendingTree are individuals that started a project as part of a school project, school class, and continued working on it even after the class was over, just because they were intellectually curious about it. We love that. And so, if that's the case, you want to clearly show that. And then I think everything looks good except for the formatting. So languages and platforms, I think it's good, but it should be, I'd probably put it towards the bottom and I would list it horizontally. Same thing with technical skills. Maybe the same thing with soft skills, although again, people just kind of usually take that with a grain of salt. They're more interested in the facts. And I do like the idea of having more of a kind of a summary at the top of what you've done and just your skill level.
Okay.
But everything else I think looks good. You don't even necessarily have to put at the top for, I think it was your master's, you have a start date and end date. I would take away the start date. Like to keep it, I would just keep things really clean and and like easy to understand. Want to scroll down to your experience?
Yeah, and that's why I asked that question specifically about. I read a resource online that said, if you have no directly applicable experience, then you shouldn't go back all the way, I guess, to your bagging experience or your cashier experience at Wegmans, right? You need to only list things that are relevant to the position in which you're applying. So in this case, the last position I held last year was as a data manager in software development, but there wasn't really much analytical. There was no data science practically in that. It was just managing a large repository and some source code and doing some beta testing for the software. So that's why I focus on course projects, and then projects I've had, I do on my own because I'm interested. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, I would say really that experience as a data manager absolutely has more weight than a project. It just does, even though there's no direct correlation, it does carry more weight. And I would say that if somebody was coming out, say, with a bachelor's degree or even a master's, and they took a part-time job, and it was part of what they did through school, even though it has nothing to do with what they're going to be doing, I would include that. Like it shows that they worked part-time, while they were going to school. And so, it's different than obviously what the article you read, but personal opinion, I would view that as positive. And so I would include something like that. But, I can see what you're saying, ideally relevant experience matters. It's just not, it's not expected for someone coming right out of college.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good baseline to jump from, is that where is the boundary of expectation? I think it largely falls on the recruiter, right? They kind of understand that this person's coming from college. For me, for example, after this position as data manager, I've been a full-time grad student since. I was actually a full-time grad student when I worked that job. But the point being that after that, it's like, well, they were pet projects I started up on my own because I was really interested in whatever topic, or it's just school projects I've taken even further, or just a project that I worked really hard on all semester that I'm proud of, for example, that I felt I extracted a lot of knowledge or learning experience from.
Yeah, so absolutely, I would list it, but I would put the personal, professional experience on top of that, and even then, I would list experience, right? Like it's understood that it's professional, so I would just put experience. I would leave off anything that you did from this for anyone, anything you did in high school, except if you got, a near perfect score or perfect score on your SATs, ACT. If there's something just really stellar, I would still put that on for your first job. Then after your first job, I would get rid of it. And I would say this: if anyone went to a top high school, that carries a lot of weight. Like if you went to Phillips Exeter or one of those top schools, Phillips Andover, there's a bunch of them. It shouldn't matter. It does. And so if you went to a top boarding school, and they're like 80,000 a year now, but if you went to one of those, actually, it does matter. Short of that, I would leave absolutely everything off.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And what's at the bottom?
Oh, this is it. Yes. I tried, to Kevin's point, it was just an attempt to be as succinct as possible,
Right.
I guess, as my husband often says, like, be brief, be brilliant, be gone. So
Right.
it's gonna be the focus here. So thank you.
But I think the content is really good.
Okay. Fix it around a little bit.
So being cognizant of time, Chris, I want to be aware of your time, and we're a little bit over. Any last quick questions from folks? Chris, any comments?
No, happy to help, and it can be difficult to give me a respond, but if you send me a question on LinkedIn, here's another thing: reach out to as many people as you can on LinkedIn, including myself. The more connections you have, the more people you can see. More importantly, the more people can see you. So if you have a question, absolutely send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll happy to answer it.
Chris, can't say thank you enough. And for all of you, next week we've got Jen Pack, who's going to be joining us for the Wednesday seminar. So for those of you who want to practice some of those interview skills, or maybe show off that resume, that newly tuned up resume, here comes your next chance. Thank you all for joining us. It's good to have you, and stay safe. Chris, thank you. again.
Good thing.
All right.
Have a good night.
Take care. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.